This is the story of Arthur Morris, told in his own words through extracts of his recorded interview. In 1940, Arthur was a navigator with 12 Squadron in France. He was shot down on the 13th of June and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner, during which time he received a Dear John letter from his wife.
We were initially at Bury Back, which was about 12 miles north of Reims. Then we moved on to a small village called Amifontaine, and it was just a field there, nothing else. That was going to be our operations area. I was on leave on May the 10th. I didn't get back until the Sunday, and by that time we had lost about at least 5 crews already. By the end of the Sunday, we'd lost about another 3 or 4. And then the following Tuesday, the target was about 20 minutes of flying time away from our aerodrome. And 5 aircraft went off after lunch, about 20 minutes flying to do the bombing. And I was on the second batch to go do the raid. And of the 5, one aircraft came back. We went back to our billet, and we were living in a large house. There were 7 in one room, 6 in the other, pilots and navigators. Of those 13, there were 2 of us left. That night, when we went to the mess, I think I'd reached an all-time low, and my future did not look very rosy. However, I went on raids night and day, and I suppose I existed. One's mentality, I suppose, becomes fixed. You don't try not to think of what the future is or what's going to happen tomorrow. The sorties consisted of daylight raids and night raids. The night raids were comparatively simple, or losses were very low, but on the daylight raids, of a flight of 5, we always lost at least 2 on every raid. I was shot down on my 9th raid. I was doing a daylight raid on tanks refuelling in the woods south of Sézanne, and we were attacked by 2 109s. There was this noise of bullets hitting the aircraft. Then the next thing I knew was we were engulfed basically in flames, the aircraft. Our port tank was hit and burst into flames, and the burning petrol was blowing back onto the wireless operator and myself. And we had no option but to bail out and land by parachute. The pilot, he couldn't get his hood open, and the port tank was behind him, so he wasn't near the flames. He crash landed the aircraft subsequently.
All 3 airmen landed safely, but were soon captured by the Germans. After being moved through various transit and internment camps, Arthur found himself at Stalag 3, where he received a Dear John letter from his wife.
My wife wrote to me after 2 years and told me she was pregnant. At that time, I suppose my mind was partially numbed, partially frustrated, a bit of hate, I suppose, but I could do nothing about it. I couldn't go down to the local pub and get drunk. I couldn't go out and get another girl. It was a Dear John letter in as much as she said she'd made a mistake. She still wanted the marriage to continue, but due to the environmental conditions, and I suppose my mentality at that time, I made up my mind that I would never continue with the marriage. In fact, I have never spoken to her since. Because of the circumstances that I received the news, it had gone too deep.
Arthur was transferred to what was to be his final prisoner of war camp, Stalag 357 at Fallingbostel, just as the war was entering its final stages. On the 5th of April 1945, the prisoners of Fallingbostel were ordered to begin packing for a forced march, an attempt by the Germans to keep their prisoners ahead of the advancing Allied forces.
At the end, we were being forced marched back to further into Germany, because we could hear the guns in the distance, and it was decided if we got the opportunity we would make a break for it. We took some dark blankets with us, and we marched out on the Friday afternoon, and that night we seized the chance and we escaped. We started to march back from whence we came. It was April 45. We hid up in some bushes, and eventually 2 young lads came along, 16-year-old Germans. They were deserted, they'd been called up at 16. They were deserters. And they took us back to their farmhouse. They hid us up in the barn, up in the loft for about the last 5 days on the loose. And eventually we got back into the distribution centre, and I arrived back in England on April the 19th. My mother hadn't heard from me from the previous August. On the morning of the 20th of April, the doorbell rang and there was a telegram boy on the doorstep. And of course her mind went to the worst, but when she opened the telegram, it was to tell her I was actually in England.
After the war, Arthur joined 4 Squadron in Germany. He remarried in 1948 and, after leaving the RAF in 1950, he pursued a career in the electronics industry. In his later years, Arthur had a reunion with the pilot with whom he was shot down and was reunited with the fellow escapees of the falling Boston Long March. Please help to rescue and preserve more memories of the Second World War. Visit www.war-experience.org.